early on something known as the window of tolerance, which is a model or a theory that some of you might be familiar with. But it's basically a zone between too much and too little, like literally a window where we can help clients to occupy so they can best tolerate their moment to moment experience. In all of my work, one of the big questions that comes up is how can I support my clients around working skillfully with stress? And honestly, the window has been one of the most helpful frames and models that I've found that can really inform our interventions as mental health practitioners. So we'll be focusing specifically here on how our understanding of the window can actually support clients' resilience. So there's going to be a couple different moving parts, and I'm hoping to mix it up here in this session. So there's some practice, also some lecture, and want this to be, as dynamic as possible for you all. So we're going to start by defining the window and also talking about resilience, just setting the table here for what I mean by these terms. And then we'll look at the relationship between the window and resilience as it relates to work around as a mental health practitioner, a coach, or a therapist. And then we'll talk about a couple of practices that you can start using right away inside your own practice that will be supporting clients' resilience as it relates to the window of tolerance. It's because I'm a mindfulness practitioner, and that having some level of presence with this topic would be useful. I thought we could start with just a very brief practice, just to support all of us to kind of land here inside of this session and this topic. So I just invite you to take a moment here. I'll just be here for about a minute. You can have your eyes open or have them closed. And just invite you to take a moment here to pause. Maybe a couple of deeper breaths. You could feel the contact, the buttocks in a chair, the feet on the ground. Just taking a moment to ground in the here and now. You could even orient to the current time and space, noticing the time of day, where you are right now as you're hearing this session. Really letting yourself be present, not just as an idea or concept, but through a lived visceral experience. And then finally, just noticing where you are right now, how you're coming in to this session. Could be noticing your mood, your emotional state, any sensations that are predominant in the body, or what narratives are here. And just seeing if you can make room for all of that there's some basic agreement with whatever it is that you discover. And then in the next few breaths, we'll shift here. So taking a few more deeper breaths, maybe a little bit of gentle movement, and then we'll start in here on this topic. Okay, thanks everyone. So as a way in here, I just want to start with a quick story of a client that I was working with about 6 months ago. So we were a number of months into the pandemic at this point. And the client had some tools to work with difficulty, adversity, and stress. They had done some therapy, some coaching, they had some familiarity around meditation. And one of the questions that came up that feels relevant and useful for us here is, how would I know when to be present with my experience, and when would I do something different? So this person was meditating. They were having a really hard time with their family. It was just really difficult, a lot of stress. And so they said, well, let me try to lean into my meditation practice for just 15 to 20 minutes in the mornings. And they found that sometimes during practice, they would connect with the stress, the emotions that they were feeling And it would be helpful. They could be present with the experience. But other times it felt like it was too much. They would start to become quite hypervigilant. Sometimes they would start to sweat or have become very flushed and have an exaggerated startle response if there was a noise outside of the room. And so this core question arose in this person's life, and it came into our clinical work together, which is, how would I know when to actually stick with this difficulty inside of meditation or just in my life? And when would I back off? When would I know that I need to do something different? Maybe I need to even distract myself, go watch a show, go for a walk. But the person said, I don't want to just run away from my difficulty. It's part of the reason that I'm doing meditation. And one of the ways that I've learned to talk about this, and I think it's very useful for all of us here who are doing work with people, is when do we help people be with their experience, and when do we help people work with their experience? Because there's a difference between the two. Being with is that skill of mindfulness, really allowing people to simply observe and be present with their experience without trying to change it. Similar to the meditation that we just started with. It's like the instruction wasn't to try to change how you're feeling, it was to actually recognize how you were and not try to change it. We're not trying to push the river. On the other hand, we have skills around working with our experience where we might actively try and intentionally shift our moment to moment experience. Where are the times where with a client you say, let's just be with that? And where are the times with a client that you say, let's do something different. Let's stand up. Let's do some deep breaths together. Let's do some work around resourcing and resilience. All of you will have a number of tools. So that's a core question that I've learned about in my work is, when do we lean in? When do we back off? And how would we know what are the interventions that are going to support our clients' resilience inside of all that? What will help our clients bounce back from adversity, stress, and trauma? So that's the way in here. That's kind of a core question is, what's going to tell you when to lean in or back off? How would you know? And how would we know what's best going to support our clients? And the answer to that question for this session will be focusing on the window of tolerance. This is a core framework or model that can actually really help guide our moment to moment decisions as clinicians and practitioners about what's needed in a present moment. So it's a bit of I think of it as a bit of a roadmap that we can follow. So, for the next maybe 10 minutes, I'm going to break this down about the different aspects of the window of tolerance. We'll talk about resilience. And then for the second half here, we'll be really getting into practices. So what is it that you actually can do with your clients? Okay. So the window of tolerance was coined by Dan Siegel. Dan's a neuroscientist at UCLA in California in the US. Many of you probably would know his work around the mind, also working with youth. And Siegel used both complexity theory and systems theory to come up with this model around the window of tolerance. So we're going to be talking about this model in particular around the nervous system of the clients that we're working with. But this model could also be applied in a number of different ways. We could apply it to, for example, a family system. We could also apply it to a healthcare system. There's many applications. Siegel has also applied it to the ecosphere and looking at kind of our larger environment. But we're going to focus here on individuals and their nervous systems. This is a graphic that captures the window of tolerance as it relates to the nervous system under stress. And this graphic comes from the National Institute for the Clinical Application of Behavioral Medicine. This is a graphic that's actually free, available online. You can use it with clients. You can use it in your own work. I appreciate that they made it public. But the idea here, as you can see, is that we have a middle zone here represented in yellow that's known as the window of tolerance. And this is the technical term here is an optimal zone of physiological arousal. Yeah, this kind of sweet spot between too much and too little. So when we're in our windows or when a client's in their window, it's like our heart is beating, but it's not racing. Or we might feel energized, but we don't necessarily feel anxious or overly anxious. We can feel stress or pressure, but we can cope with it. Like quite literally, we can tolerate it. That's where this word comes from, around the window of tolerance. We can be present with our experience. That doesn't mean that we're flat. Sometimes people hear about the window and they think, oh, that just means being calm. We can actually be quite distressed, be sad and happy. We can also be inside of our window. Now, on the two extremes of this are forms of what's known as dysregulation. And this is where we're really getting into the neurophysiology of stress and of trauma. But as you'll see, that we have the red and the orange here. You could think of this as almost one different band together. But let's focus on the top here, and that is hyperarousal. So hyperarousal means that there's literally too much arousal in the nervous system. And this is where we're feeling, our clients feeling anxious, overwhelmed, and out of control. On the way to hyperarousal, we have this orange band here of dysregulation. And you can all, imagine or track for yourselves, what does it feel like for you when you start to get stressed? You're moving towards extreme anxiety, and there's that band or that zone of dysregulation. You're starting to feel a little bit dysregulated, but you're not fully in this band of hyperarousal. You can see this volcano up top. One way this is talked about in terms of too much arousal is like the accelerator of the autonomic nervous system being slammed to the ground. Again, it's too much for us. Our pupils are wide, our heart rate is racing. So that's hyperarousal. And then on the lower end here, you'll notice hypoarousal. And this is literally too little physiological arousal in the system. And this is where we're feeling spacey, zoned out, or numb. And again, you can see that orange band of dysregulation. There are gradations that a person will go on that has them know whether they're in or out of their window. As a practice here, in a moment we'll talk about, well, how does this all tie into our client work and work resilience? But just to bring this as live as possible, see if you can notice for a moment, where are you in your window right now? See if you can notice either through the visual, but also turning inside, turning your attention to your inner world. Where would you place yourself on this graph? In this moment right now, do you sense that you are in your window, like kind of in the middle? Or are you more towards dysregulation on either side? Where there's a lot of energy, or there's not enough energy? And simply notice what told you that that's where your window of tolerance is right now, or where you are in your window. It's helpful for us as clinicians to notice what the signs and signals are, where we get those data points of information. You can come back here to this graphic. I want to talk for a moment about why this would be useful for us as clinicians. Then we'll talk about how it connects to resilience. So the first part is that people who are experiencing high degrees of stress and even trauma will tend to experience something known as dysregulated arousal, meaning that they are out of their window of tolerance. This is another graph just acknowledging that our arousal is changing all the time. And then people who are traumatized or under high degrees of stress, they will end up going outside of their window of tolerance. Now, one of the things that you can look for are these different signs of dysregulated arousal. You don't necessarily have to train in trauma work for a year or 2 years to be able to start to identify the signs that people are under significant amounts of stress. Now, all of you will have, of course, your own competence of how you're recognizing this, But this regulated arousal is a key competency that we can hold in terms of being able to recognize when people are out of their window and what interventions that we actually might want to use to support people to come back into their window. So, I work with a lot of meditation, yoga teachers, coaches, and therapists who are not necessarily professional trauma therapists, but they're interested in working with trauma. They say, well, how would I know if someone might be experiencing trauma, or how can I gauge someone's level of activation in a session? Arousal is key. Physiological arousal is a great way because you can learn to track for nonverbal cues that tells you that someone's out of their window. So let me show you a couple of lists here. But these are two different, I'm going to show you both two lists here. And these are signs and signals that you can look for that someone might be out of their window of tolerance. So first here we have some signs of hyperarousal. And you're welcome to pause. You can look through this. But common signs of hyperarousal would be agitation, some kind of hyperactivity in one's soma. It could be tingling, twitching, hyperventilation. An exaggerated startle response is key. Increased heart rate. There's all these different signs and signals that you can learn to track for. Again, not to necessarily diagnose trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder, but to give you cues that someone might be outside of their window, which we'll talk about in a moment, is very important to ascertain when it comes to working with resilience. If you want to pause and look at it, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I'm going to move here to hypoarousal. So here's the signs of hypoarousal. Again, not enough physiological arousal in the nervous system. So this could be something like a flaccid muscle tone. Someone is extremely still, frozen. They have that pale skin tone or a fixed gaze. I mean, many of you, I imagine, have either experienced this or you've been with someone where they have that 1,000-yard stare. It's like they're there, but they're not really there. There's some absence. Dissociation really fits into hypoarousal. So here's another list here of different signs that you can look for around hypoarousal. So why I'm bringing this in is simply as a way to begin recognizing how would you know if someone is outside of their window of tolerance. Yeah, we can become competent at recognizing these verbal and nonverbal signs that someone is out of their window. A second point that I want to make, and this will tie right into resilience in terms of why the window is so important, is that as you can see here with these two different arrows, especially the arrows here on the left, is that stress and trauma will tend to shrink our window of tolerance. Now, as you can imagine, that's not a surprise to many of you, but it can be a very important psychoeducational moment for clients when they see this model, if you decide to bring this in to work with clients, of realizing that there is a pressure that clients will face when they're under significant amounts of stress. And I found this really important and useful inside of this moment around the global pandemic of helping people acknowledge what the sustained adversity has done to their window. Now, as you can imagine, when someone has a smaller and more narrow window of tolerance, it takes less and less stress to have them feel dysregulated. Like the pressure is squeezing down on the window, and it would take something that might have in a year earlier might have not been a big deal to someone, actually causes someone to become dysregulated and even hyper or hypo-aroused. So we could talk about this, of course, for an hour here, about the different conditions that weigh down on people's window of tolerance. It could be acute stress, developmental trauma, social conditions. I think of the anticipatory grief and trauma that so many people in communities have faced that are narrowing people's window of tolerance. As a quick side note, again, remember earlier I said this is a systems model. The window doesn't just apply to individuals. So for those of you that work with groups or with families, you can also think of the ways that group will have a window of tolerance. This is a systemic model. So, for example, the healthcare systems that we depend on, many of those systems have a more narrow window of tolerance. It doesn't take as much input to have the system itself become overwhelmed and dysregulated. So we could have a whole large conversation about that, but we'll bracket that for now. I'll turn your attention here to the right side of this graph. And this is where we get to resilience. In many ways, the work that we're doing as mental health practitioners is to help people widen their window of tolerance. All of the tools, and this is a particular frame, let's see if it holds water for you. It's like all of the tools and the competence and the interventions that you have learned up until now, many of those will be in service of helping clients widen their window of tolerance, to be able to be with greater and greater forms of stress and adversity that they'll face in their lives. Whether it's the level of attunement and connection that you are bringing to a client interaction, whether it's an intervention that you're making around, say, cognitive behavioral work, an intervention around somatic psychology and embodiment, all of those different tools are often in service of helping people widen their window of tolerance. In my experience, when I'm doing my best work, I'm not sure about all of you, my window is wide. That I'm in a place where it would take a lot for me to bump up against my edges. And then my client can actually feel my wide window, and I can become something of a psychobiological regulator for that client. So I just invite you to take a moment as we shift into talking about resilience of noticing the signs for you that you are outside of your window. For every one of us, it's going to be different. Just notice, what tells me, what are the signs and symptoms that I am either in orange here, in dysregulation, or maybe I'm even in the red here, in hyperarousal or hypoarousal, kind of fight, flight, or freeze. But it's useful for us to know, what are those subtle signs and symptoms? I'll say for me, I can become quite irritated. My sense of hearing becomes hypersensitive. My eyes become more myopic. I can't really see in my peripheral vision. So just notice for yourself here, what are your signs? And then let's shift here to talking about resilience. So as promised with this session, the whole point here was to know how we could support clients in being able to work skillfully with stress, really to tolerate more and more of the adversity that they might be facing. And this is the point here. But first, before we get into practices, let me just define resilience here and what I mean. So resilience is really, as I've been saying, our ability to bounce back from adversity. It's when a client is able to say, I was under this hardship, but I can actually feel fundamentally okay. I have tools and strategies that enables me to bounce back. And this is immediately where resilience ties into the window. The way that I tend to think about resilience is very much like moss. It literally is resilient. As you tamp it down, it springs back. There's this ability for us to come back into balance, harmony, and a sense of well-being. And that's very much like the window. If you imagine that stress weighing down on a client that we're working with, what are the tools and strategies that will allow them to actually widen their window and come back into resilience? When a client, again, is under stress, their window will shrink. When a client is resilient, when they have tools and strategies, they will be able to widen their window over time. So here's the pivot in the whole session here. How do we do this? What are the tools that we can offer to clients that will enable them to work skillfully with their own windows and be able to be more resilient over time? So I want to offer you a couple practices here. On some level, you could pause or stop the video here, and if the window is a useful frame for you, you could use that as a way to be working with dysregulation, etc. But I want to get into some tools here with you all. So the first tool here is introducing the window of tolerance to our clients. So I can't tell you the number of people I've met who brought this particular model to their clients, and their clients had a light bulb moment. And they said, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I have been largely dysregulated for the last 6 months, and I haven't had tools to come back into my window. I have been hyper aroused or hypo aroused for most of my life, and I didn't even know it. So it can give people a sense of agency, a sense of empowerment, and some psychological understanding of what's happening inside their nervous system. So if the window is useful for you, I found that to be a really useful intervention to bring in. The second practice I want to offer is a guided practice that you could do both for yourself, but you can also offer this to clients. And this is going to be a practice of how it is we can have, or help clients have, a level of curiosity and respect towards themselves and their windows. And here's what I want to say this. A lot of the clients who I meet, and I've had my own experience here, I imagine many of you have, they will shame themselves and they'll become very frustrated and self-critical when they find themselves out of their window. It's like they feel like they did something wrong. However, when you back up far enough from the window of tolerance, what you can see is that these different zones of hypoarousal, and dysregulation actually serve a purpose. Yeah, they are a deeply intelligent, factory-loaded response of the nervous system to working with stress. One of the things we don't want to do, or at least in my opinion, we don't want to do as a clinician, is making anything outside of the window wrong, or shaming someone for being hyper aroused. On the contrary, the point here is to have a level of respect, curiosity, and support for the different strategies that people have to cope with their lives. And dysregulated arousal is one. This is a sign that someone is responding, their nervous system is responding to stress. So helping clients to have some level of self-compassion, understanding, and even respect for their physiological responses that they're having to stress, that's a big deal. And it's in many ways a bit of a game changer, as I've seen with clients who start to go, wow, I'm really stressed out right now, and that makes a lot of sense, versus, God, I'm really stressed out again, and I'm frustrated by that. So we're going to do a practice here designed to help people really embody this quality of care, support, and curiosity towards their experience. So I invite you, we'll be here for maybe 4 minutes, somewhere around there. Just invite you to begin to take a moment here and pause. This is a way to start the practice. You could have your eyes open or closed as we begin. I'm just taking a moment here to check in. Noticing your mood, noticing what thoughts are here, narratives about this work, topic that we've been in, sensations. Just simply recognizing what's in the here and now. Perhaps feeling some anchor points of the buttocks in the chair or the feet on the ground, wherever you are. And then I'm going to offer 2 different parts to this practice, and it's going to involve working with your hands. If you don't have access to your hands, you can use your feet, or you can also visualize this practice. You can just listen to my voice. Otherwise, I invite you to notice here, I'm going to be showing you in the camera. I'm going to have my hands in the frame here, but you don't need to have them up. You can actually just have them in your lap if you like. For the first part of this practice, the invitation is to, with one hand, go ahead and make a closed fist. And in doing so, I'd like you to imagine that the job of this fist is to stay closed. And in staying closed, This fist is taking care of your safety, really fundamentally taking care of your survival. So, fist closed, its job is to take care of your safety by staying closed. Then, with the other hand, the invitation here is to go ahead and try to pry open the fist. So, as you do that, simply notice what happens. You could notice what happens to the breath, your body. Does the fist open or close? Good. And then you can let that go. And you can shake that out if you'd like. And then it's going to be part 2 of the practice. And the same thing, just invite you to close your fist. It's taking care of your safety. And then with your other hand, bring a quality of care, of curiosity, and also respect into this other hand. And in your own time, when you're ready, go ahead and place the hand underneath that fist. And as you do so, see if you can communicate something akin to good job. And of course, you're closed. And you're taking care of safety. So there's something deeply intelligent here. You don't need to change. And also, I have no agenda for you to open. I'm simply here and present with you right now. Just taking a moment here, a couple more breaths. Again, just as an experiment, just noticing what happens. And then finally, just noticing if there's any particular words or phrases that the closed fist would feel supported in hearing. So that might be something like, good job, as I said earlier, here I'm present. I care about what your job, what you're taking care of. And then in the next few breaths, you can let that go. And then just taking a moment here, one last pause as we shift. Act that practice. You're welcome to pause the video and just notice any learning here. Shift back here. Okay, thank you all. So that's one of the practices here, is helping people at a fundamental level have some form of respect and curiosity towards their experience. This is in many ways, it's a very regulating practice, as I've seen over time, that people learn to bring an attitude of care, of curiosity, and respect to themselves. And this actually supports their regulation, brings them back into their window if they're feeling dysregulated. I know a number of clients who, when they become dysregulated, they actually do this practice as a way to help bring themselves back into their window. Second practice, I'm going to offer you 2 more. Second practice is actually a very straightforward breathing practice that was created by a teacher in Australia that I know named Timothy Goddard. Timothy is a mindfulness teacher, trauma therapist, and clinician. And when I asked her, I said, what is your go-to practice for helping people come back in their window when they're dysregulated? And Timothy said, by far and away, it's this practice around working with the breath and also working with the hands. This is a way to help people have a sense of agency inside of their own bodies and minds, and also to help them slow their breathing or control their breathing in a way that has them feel more regulated. So as we begin here, just invite you to notice where you are in your window in this moment. Taking a baseline here for yourself. And then I'm going to have my hands here in the picture, but you're welcome to also have them in your lap. You don't have to have them up top here. The invitation is to open and close your hands with the inhalation and the exhalation of your breath. So it looks something like inhaling, exhaling, inhaling, exhaling. And then the main part of this practice is opening and closing the hands at the pace and the depth that you feel will support your window. So perhaps you want to have some longer breaths, and you can do that with your hands in and out. But just find the pace and the depth of the breath that feels most supportive for you. Inhaling, exhaling. And taking a moment here, again, this practice is meant to support your window, seeing if you can find the rhythm that best supports you here. Inhale, exhale. You can notice where you want to focus your attention. Maybe it's on the hands, maybe it's on the hands and the lungs. A couple more here. And last one. Go. So, very simple practice working with breath and hands that help people to regulate, widen their window over time, and help them be more resilient. So you instruct one to be doing, and then in a lot of clients who are experiencing dysregulated arousal, they often feel like they're not in choice around their bodies. At any point, they can find themselves dysregulated. And this is a way to instill a sense of agency back in someone. You can give them that feeling that I'm in control of the breath. I can decide how deep or how shallow I want the breath to be. So those are the first two main practices I wanted to do. Working with the breath in the hands, introducing the window as we talked about. And then the final practice I want to work with involves some physical postures where clients can make self-contact, or they can be making physical contact with themselves, and that enables them to re-regulate and to come back in their window. Again, this isn't to make dysregulation wrong or to try to be some kind of magic bullet, but it's a way to help people at least learn to re-regulate, which widens the window over time. Every time a client becomes dysregulated and then can actually, through an intentional practice, come back into their window, that widens their window. They become more resilient over time. So here is a couple of different postures, then we'll just try it together before we end here. So the first one of the three will be having a hand on the heart. It could also be a hand on the heart and the belly, or it could be two hands on the heart, just finding whatever feels best for you here. And as you make contact here, go ahead and notice what the best placement and pressure would be for you right now. It's going to support your window. So maybe you want to move your hand to a different spot, or you want a little bit more pressure. Only you will know, and our clients will know exactly the right spot for us. Taking a moment here to feel that contact. Could be the feeling of being contacted, or it could also be the sensations of offering contact to ourselves, focusing on the hand or focusing on the chest, or both. Just noticing how that feels for you. Good. And then the second posture here, again, these are all just experiments for you to notice what feels best, and we can offer these to clients as well, is to have a hand at the base of the neck. So right back here, base of the skull. There's some research to suggest that physical contact with the bottom of the brainstem can actually be quite regulating. So making contact with the base of the neck, and again, noticing placement and pressure. If you'd like, if it feels helpful, you can have a hand on the forehead as well to support some containment. Otherwise, just having your hand on the back of the neck, and once again noticing how this impacts your window. Maybe it feels regulating, or maybe it feels dysregulating or stirring, in which case you're welcome to shift. Otherwise, just noticing this one as an experiment. Good. And then we'll shift to a third and final posture. And this has to do with containment. People who are out of their window often feel like they're coloring outside of the boundaries, or coloring outside of the lines. And so having a sense of physical containment given by ourselves, sometimes by other people, it's going to be very helpful. In this case, it will be a practice around helping people to give themselves containment. Just lower my camera. So the first posture here is to have our hands under our armpits, but there's different variations here. You could also have a hand in the bicep and under the armpit. You could have both hands on the shoulders. Just notice for you which one feels best here. Experimenting with the containment. And then again, just taking a moment here and noticing how this impacts your window. Finding just the right placement and pressure for you. And then in the next few breaths, we'll shift here. But you could notice for yourself, if we were to do a longer practice, which one would you choose? Or is there a different one that actually would be supportive of your window? Feeling that physical contact. Maybe it's one of those three, maybe it's a different version. Again, this is a practice that we can support their window. That's what we have. We have these different levels of physical containment. We're making physical contact. We can work with the breath and the hands. We can introduce the window to others. There's many different ways that we can support people's window, which ultimately supports their resilience over time. So that's the main different learning points that I wanted to cover inside of this session. So just to review briefly here, many of us are under significant amounts of stress. Many systems are under significant amounts of stress and are facing adversity and trauma right now, which will tend to shrink our window of tolerance. We'll press down on that window, meaning it takes less and less stress and input to have someone feel dysregulated. What we can do as clinicians is to actually both recognize signs that someone's outside of their window of tolerance, and then actually support people with practices that enable them to re-regulate, to come back in their window, and ultimately widen their window of tolerance over time, helping them be more resilient and be able to cope more effectively with the stress and adversity that they're facing now and they'll inevitably be facing in the years to come. So just deep respect here for all of you and the work that you're doing as mental health practitioners. Whatever context you're working within, whatever hat you're wearing, I feel like this is a time that your work and our work is desperately needed. That we are, it's a time to be bold, to be confident, and to be brave, and take our skills really out into the world and really lean in to the stress and the difficulty that we are going to be exposed to and seeing people experience in our practice. So thank you so much for being here. Really honored, love this community, and really happy to get to join you. If you have any particular comments or questions about the video, you can reach out to me on this website here. Otherwise, just thank you for being here as part of this session, and all the best to you inside of your practice and your work.